Captain Jake Reynolds was no stranger to dangerous missions. As a highly trained human soldier, he had seen more combat than most could imagine. He was stationed on the hostile planet of Xylaris, known for its deadly wildlife and even deadlier alien species. This mission was different, though. Jake was tasked with rescuing a group of high-profile alien diplomats who had been ambushed on their journey across the planet. These aliens were from 4 different species, each possessing unique and powerful abilities. But the one thing they all shared in common was their reliance on technology to protect them, which, in this hostile environment, had failed them. Jake's ship descended through the thick, greenish atmosphere, the ground below a vast jungle filled with dangerous creatures. The mission was clear: rescue the aliens and get out alive. The team of diplomats had been traveling through the dense forest when they were suddenly attacked by terrifying, giant predators that seemed to appear out of nowhere. Jake's mission was simple: save them, at any cost. However, nothing was ever simple when it came to this deadly planet. The moment Jake touched down, the ground trembled beneath him. He could feel the tension in the air, the anticipation of the hunt. The predatory creatures of Xylaris were never far behind, always lurking in the shadows, ready to strike. As he suited up, preparing his advanced weapons and scanning equipment, his mind raced. He was about to face creatures that were far stronger and faster than anything Earth had to offer. But Jake wasn't worried. Humans were underestimated everywhere, and that was their greatest advantage. Jake moved silently through the dense underbrush, his cloaking device activated. He was invisible, but he could hear the sounds of alien creatures stalking nearby. As he approached the coordinates, he could see flashes of movement in the distance. The alien girls were in trouble. Peering through his high-tech visor, Jake saw them, 4 stunningly beautiful alien girls, each one from a different race. The first, Lyra, had glowing silver skin and hair that shimmered like liquid metal. The second, Zara, was tall and graceful, her body encased in a translucent armor that glowed with energy. Mira, the third, had vibrant blue skin and sharp, angular features, exuding a natural fierceness. And Kara, the fourth, was short and agile, with long red hair and eyes that seemed to see right through him. They were trapped. Massive, reptilian creatures were closing in on them. These predators were formidable, covered in thick, armored scales with razor-sharp claws and teeth. They were known for hunting in packs, and now they had cornered these alien girls with no way out. Jake's heart raced, but his training took over. He wasn't about to let these girls, who were supposed to be the most important diplomats in the galaxy, be torn apart by wild animals. He tapped his wrist console, activating his cloaking device to remain hidden. With a quick motion, he pulled out a plasma rifle and aimed at the creatures. The predators hadn't yet noticed him, but they would soon. Jake took a deep breath and fired the first shot. The beam of energy hit the largest of the creatures square in the chest, sending it flying back. The others shrieked in rage and turned toward the sound. Jake didn't hesitate. He fired again, hitting another creature squarely in the face, causing it to stumble backward. His aim was perfect, but the creatures were relentless. Lyra, Zara, Mira, and Kara watched in shock as Jake, a human, took on the predators with an impressive display of skill. Their glowing eyes widened in disbelief as Jake moved swiftly, using his training and advanced technology to outmaneuver the beasts. He shot from the hip, hitting his targets with unerring precision. But despite his best efforts, the creatures were not backing down. They were fast, incredibly strong, and had the advantage of numbers. One of them lunged toward Jake, its jaws wide open, ready to tear into him. With lightning speed, Jake activated his jetpack, leaping into the air and soaring over the creature's head. He landed behind it, spinning around to face the remaining monsters. With his plasma rifle in hand, Jake was ready to finish the fight. The creatures were smart, working together to trap Jake, but they didn't anticipate his quick thinking. With another quick flick of his wrist, Jake activated his explosive grenades. He tossed them into the pack, and within seconds, a massive explosion sent the creatures scattering, their shrieks echoing through the jungle. Jake landed back on the ground, breathing heavily, his adrenaline still coursing through his veins. The creatures were defeated, but there was no time to rest. He turned to the 4 alien girls, who were now staring at him in disbelief. "You saved us?" Lyra's voice was a mix of awe and confusion. She was the first to speak, her eyes still wide with amazement. Jake lowered his rifle and nodded. "I couldn't just leave you to those things. No one deserves that." The girls exchanged looks, clearly shaken by the near-death experience. They had been relying on their advanced technology and powers to protect them, but in the end, it was Jake, an ordinary human, who had saved them. "We don't know how to thank you," Zara said, her voice filled with gratitude. Jake shrugged. "Just doing my job." But as he looked at the girls, he couldn't help but feel a strange connection forming between them. They were different, but there was something about them, something that made him want to protect them at all costs. As the jungle grew quiet, the 4 girls stood, still recovering from the shock. Jake was about to speak again when Lyra, with her glowing eyes fixed on him, said, "We owe you our lives." At that moment, Jake realized that this was only the beginning. The girls had their own unique abilities, but they were vulnerable, and they needed his help. Jake wasn't just their rescuer, he had become their protector. But in this dangerous world, no one could be fully prepared for what was to come. After the battle, the jungle of Xylaris felt eerily silent. The heavy, humid air seemed to press down on them, almost as if the planet itself was watching the group. Jake stood with the 4 alien girls, each of them catching their breath after the chaotic fight. He had expected to feel triumphant, but there was something deeper now, something he couldn't quite put his finger on. The girls were still processing the fact that they had been saved by a human. To them, humans were often considered weak or primitive compared to the advanced alien civilizations they came from. But today, Jake had proved them wrong. He was a force to be reckoned with, and they couldn't deny it. Lyra, the silver-skinned alien, was the first to speak after the silence stretched on. Her eyes glistened with a mixture of awe and gratitude as she took a few hesitant steps toward Jake. Her voice was soft but firm, you are not what we expected." Her words were carefully chosen, as if trying to understand what had just happened. Jake didn't know how to respond at first. His training had prepared him for war, for battles and strategic missions. But this was different. These weren't enemies he was facing, they were survivors, just like him. He had saved them, but they had saved him in their own way as well. The battle had been brutal, but now, in the aftermath, there was a strange sense of camaraderie between them. "We don't often get help from your kind," Lyra continued, her tone softer now. "We thought humans were, well, weak." Her eyes flickered toward the others, as if seeking confirmation. The other girls nodded slowly, still unsure how to process what had just transpired. Jake chuckled lightly, trying to break the tension. "Yeah, I've heard that before. We tend to surprise people." His attempt at humor was met with wary smiles from the girls, but it was a start. One of the other girls, a tall and lithe alien with green skin named Kayla, stepped forward. Her eyes were a piercing yellow, and her voice was smooth, but there was a hint of curiosity. "How did you do it?" she asked, genuinely intrigued. "Your technology, it's not like anything we've seen before." Jake shrugged modestly. "A little bit of human ingenuity and a lot of firepower," he said. His words were simple, but they carried weight. He knew it wasn't just the technology that had saved them, it was his instinct, his will to protect them, something he had never really had to explain. The girls seemed to relax slightly, their defensive postures softening. The tension between them and Jake was still there, but it was beginning to fade, replaced by a mutual understanding. They had been enemies by circumstance, but now, they were something else, alliances in the making. As the sun began to dip behind the thick canopy, the group found a small clearing to set up camp for the night. Jake activated a small portable shelter device, creating a dome-like barrier that would keep them safe from the planet's more dangerous creatures. He set about preparing a small fire, trying to create some normalcy amidst the chaos of the past few hours. The girls watched him, still trying to make sense of what had happened. As the fire crackled to life, Lyra sat down near Jake, her eyes flickering with curiosity. "You're different from what we were told," she said, her voice quieter now, almost as if she were trying to process her own thoughts. "We were always taught that humans were nothing more than primitive creatures, weak, violent, and unimportant in the grand scheme of things." Jake looked at her, his expression softening. "I guess we're not as simple as people think," he said, poking at the fire with a stick. "We have our flaws, sure. But when it comes down to it, humans are survivors. We fight for what we care about." Lyra studied him for a long moment, as if she were trying to see beyond the surface. Her eyes softened, and for the first time, Jake saw a flicker of respect in her gaze. The others were watching now too, each of them listening closely. They had expected a soldier, a warrior trained for battle. But what they had found was something deeper. Jake was more than just a fighter, he was a protector, someone who would put his life on the line for others. Kayla was the next to speak, her voice breaking the silence. "We thought humans couldn't be trusted. You're unpredictable." But after today, she trailed off, glancing at the other girls. "Maybe there's more to your kind than we realized." Jake felt a warmth spread through him at her words, but it was a complicated feeling. It wasn't just pride, it was something else. These girls, these aliens, were starting to see him as an equal, not just a soldier. He could sense the shift in the air, the beginning of something unexpected, trust. "I know we've had our differences," Jake said, looking each of them in the eye. "But right now, we have a bigger problem to deal with. We need to stick together. If we don't, we're all going to end up dead." Lyra nodded solemnly. "You're right," she said quietly. "We're stranded here, and we need to find a way off this planet. We can't fight this alone." Jake glanced at the others. Kayla, with her sharp features, nodded in agreement. The fourth girl, a shorter alien with bright purple skin named Nara, had been silent up until now. She looked at Jake with wide, curious eyes. You really think we can get off this planet?" Nara asked, her voice full of uncertainty. Jake gave a firm nod. "We can, but it won't be easy. There are dangers everywhere, and we're not out of the woods yet." He looked over at the horizon, where the darkening sky seemed to swallow the jungle whole. "But if we work together, we might just have a chance." The girls exchanged looks, a silent understanding passing between them. Jake had saved their lives, and now, they would have to trust him to get them out of this nightmare. For the first time, the tension between them had shifted. They weren't just survivors, they were allies. And this unexpected bond between them was the only thing that might just keep them alive on this alien world. As night fell, they settled into a restless sleep, each of them unsure of what the future would bring. But one thing was certain, their fates were now intertwined, and the only way out of this was together. The morning sun pierced through the thick canopy of trees, casting an eerie glow over the jungle. Jake and the four alien girls were up early, preparing to continue their journey. There was no time to waste, every second counted now. They had no idea how much longer they could stay hidden from the enemy, or how long the planet's hostile forces would give them before tracking them down. Jake quickly scanned the area, his senses sharp as he moved. The jungle was dense, the towering trees seemed like they were closing in, and the air was thick with humidity. The previous day's battle had left him exhausted, but his focus was sharper than ever. He couldn't afford to let his guard down, not with what was coming. Lyra, the silver-skinned alien who had become the de facto leader of the group, stood next to him, her eyes scanning the horizon. "We need to keep moving," she said quietly. "The aliens we escaped from will be looking for us. They won't stop until they have us." Jake nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. The four girls had explained that their enemies weren't just ordinary aliens, they were part of an elite military force that controlled vast territories in the galaxy. They were ruthless, technologically advanced, and didn't show mercy to anyone, especially to those who defied them. Kayla, the green-skinned girl with piercing yellow eyes, looked at Jake, her expression serious. We don't know how many ships they have, or what their next move will be. But we can't outrun them forever. They'll find us eventually. Her words carried a weight of truth, and Jake felt the pressure building inside him. They weren't just on the run, they were hunted, and the aliens they were up against weren't going to stop until they had wiped them out. Just as they were about to head deeper into the jungle, a loud, metallic sound echoed in the distance. Jake's heart skipped a beat. It was the unmistakable hum of alien craft, hovering ships with advanced cloaking devices. The girls froze, their eyes wide in alarm. The enemy was already here. They found us, Nara, the purple-skinned girl, whispered, her voice barely audible, but filled with panic. We're too late. Jake didn't hesitate. He quickly motioned for the group to move to the nearest cover, a thick cluster of bushes and rocks that might give them some protection. His mind raced, calculating their options. They were in no position to fight a large force, but running was not an option either. The girls depended on him, and he wasn't about to give up without a fight. Listen up, Jake said in a low voice, trying to stay calm. We need to fight back. We won't stand a chance if we run. Stick together, and don't let them get to us. The girls nodded, their faces set in determination. There was no turning back now. The sound of the alien craft grew louder, and suddenly, 3 sleek, silver ships appeared above the treetops, their cloaking shields flickering. They were here, hovering silently as they scanned the jungle. Jake's heart raced as he tried to stay out of sight, but the situation was growing more dangerous by the second. The enemy would soon discover their position. He had to act fast. Get ready, he whispered to the group. When I give the signal, we make a break for it. We'll head for that ridge up ahead. It's our best chance. Lyra, Kayla, and Nara all nodded, their eyes focused on the hovering ships. They knew what was at stake, and they were prepared to fight. But just as Jake was about to give the signal, the enemy ships deployed their ground troops. Hundreds of alien soldiers, armored in dark metallic suits, began to descend from the ships, their weapons glowing with deadly energy. It was a trap. Jake's blood ran cold as he realized there was no escape now. Without thinking, Jake grabbed his rifle and aimed at the closest enemy soldier. The first shot rang out, the high-powered energy beam hitting its target dead on. The alien soldier fell, but the sound of the blast echoed through the jungle, alerting the rest of the soldiers. Within moments, a full-scale firefight erupted. Jake and the girls opened fire, their weapons sending blasts of energy into the advancing alien soldiers. The girls, despite their initial hesitations, fought fiercely alongside Jake. Lyra, using her agility, took down several soldiers with precise shots, while Kayla's speed allowed her to outmaneuver the enemies and hit them from unexpected angles. Nara, though smaller, was quick with her explosives, throwing grenades that created chaos among the alien ranks. But the enemy soldiers kept coming, their advanced technology making them formidable opponents. They were better equipped, better trained, and their numbers were overwhelming. For every soldier Jake and the girls took down, 2 more appeared in their place. The jungle, once quiet and peaceful, now felt like a war zone. Jake's breath came in sharp gasps as he dodged a laser blast that singed the side of his arm. He could feel the heat from the blast and knew that if it had hit him, it would have been game over. His heart pounded in his chest, but he kept pushing forward, knowing the girls were relying on him. He couldn't afford to let them down. As the battle raged on, the alien soldiers began to advance, slowly pushing Jake and the girls back toward the ridge. Their movements were precise, and their tactics showed years of military experience. The group had managed to hold their ground, but it was clear they were outmatched. "We can't keep this up much longer," Kayla said, her voice strained as she fired another round. "We need a way out." Jake didn't have an answer. His mind raced, trying to find a way to turn the tide. Just as it seemed like they were about to be overwhelmed, a low rumble shook the ground beneath them. Jake's eyes widened. The sound of a massive explosion echoed through the air, and for a split second, the enemy forces hesitated. The blast had come from behind them. A new wave of firepower rained down on the enemy soldiers, forcing them to take cover. Jake turned to see what had caused the explosion, his heart leaping when he saw the source. It was a human ship, an old military model, but it was enough. A squadron of soldiers, wearing the same uniform as Jake, had arrived to back them up. They were here. "Hold the line!" Jake shouted, signaling the girls to regroup. The battle was far from over, but for the first time, they had a fighting chance. The unexpected reinforcement had leveled the playing field, and now, with the odds shifted in their favor, Jake and the girls prepared for what would come next. The battle was over, but the jungle around them was still eerily quiet. The smoke from the explosions had begun to settle, and the distant hum of the alien ships had faded. Jake stood among the group of survivors, feeling the weight of what they had just endured. His heart still pounded in his chest, but it wasn't just from the adrenaline of the fight, it was something else. The 4 alien girls stood nearby, their faces tired but determined. They had all fought alongside him, and they had survived together. The bond they had formed in the heat of battle was stronger than anything he had ever experienced. But now that the dust was beginning to settle, Jake couldn't ignore the feelings that had been building inside him. Lyra, the leader of the group, was staring out into the distance, her silver skin gleaming faintly in the dim light. Her expression was calm, but there was a subtle tension in the air, something unspoken between them all. Kayla, the agile one with green skin, was sitting on a nearby rock, her head in her hands, clearly exhausted. Nara and Bonner were talking in hushed tones, their faces serious as they checked over their weapons and supplies. Jake walked over to where Lyra was standing, his boots crunching softly against the leaves beneath him. He had been thinking about this moment ever since the fight ended. There was something about her, something that had drawn him to her from the very beginning. He had always been drawn to strong, capable women, but Lyra was different. She wasn't just strong, she was a leader. Her determination, her resilience, and the way she had carried herself through the battle, she had captured his heart in ways that he couldn't fully understand. When he reached her, Lyra didn't turn to face him right away. Instead, she kept her eyes on the horizon, her posture tense. There was something heavy in the air between them, like an unspoken question lingering in the space around them. Jake cleared his throat, trying to break the silence. "You did great back there," he said, his voice low but sincere. "You're one hell of a fighter." Lyra finally turned to him, her eyes meeting his with a quiet intensity. For a moment, neither of them spoke. It was as if the entire world had stopped just for them. She nodded slightly, acknowledging his words. "We fought together," she said softly. "It wasn't just me. It was all of us." Jake stepped closer, feeling the heat of the moment rise between them. He had never been one to shy away from speaking his mind, but this situation felt different. He wasn't just facing a dangerous enemy, he was facing his own emotions, and he didn't quite know how to express them. "I know," he said. "But you were incredible. You've been incredible since we met. You've led us through some of the toughest situations I've ever faced, and I don't think I could have done it without you." Lyra didn't say anything at first. Instead, she reached out and placed a hand on his arm, her touch surprisingly warm despite her alien physiology. She seemed to be searching his face, her eyes scanning him in a way that made him feel exposed, vulnerable. "You don't have to say it," Lyra said quietly. "I know. We all know. But that doesn't mean it's easy. This, She paused, looking away for a moment as if trying to find the right words. This war, this fight, it's changed everything. We're not the same people we were before. Jake nodded. He understood what she meant. The galaxy was a dangerous place, and the lives they had lived before this moment were far behind them. They were no longer just survivors, they were warriors, and that came with a weight that neither of them could ignore. For a moment, there was nothing but silence between them, and Jake felt that familiar tension, the space between them slowly closing. His heart was racing now, not from fear or danger, but from something much more complicated. He had always been a fighter, always been someone who took action when things went wrong. But this was different. This wasn't a fight. This was his heart on the line. I never thought I'd find myself in this position, Jake finally said, his voice soft. You, Kayla, Nara, Bonner. You've all changed me. I've always been on my own before, but now I don't want to be. I don't want to lose any of you. Lyra's eyes softened, and she stepped closer to him. Her hand slipped from his arm and gently rested on his chest, just above his heart. Jake felt the warmth of her touch, and for the first time since this whole ordeal had started, he felt at peace, like he wasn't alone anymore. You don't have to worry about that, she whispered. We're with you. We're all in this together. Jake took a deep breath, feeling the weight of her words settle over him. But still, something inside him told him that he needed to say more. He couldn't just leave things unsaid between them. I want you to know something, Jake said, his voice steady but full of emotion. I don't know what the future holds for us, what's coming next or how we'll get through all of this, but I want you to know that I care about you. I care about all of you. Lyra's expression softened further, and for a moment, it seemed like she was going to speak, but she didn't. Instead, she just leaned in slightly, resting her forehead against his. Jake closed his eyes, feeling the bond between them grow stronger. The warmth of her touch, the closeness they shared, was everything he had needed all this time. He wasn't sure what the future held, but he knew one thing for sure, he wasn't going to let go of this. I'm not going anywhere, Jake said, his words full of conviction. I'll fight for all of you, no matter what. I promise. Lyra finally pulled back slightly, her eyes meeting his, and for the first time, she smiled, a small, genuine smile that made Jake's heart skip a beat. And in that moment, under the fading light of the jungle, everything felt right. The weight of the battle, the uncertainty of the future, it didn't matter. They had each other. And that was all that mattered. The stars above twinkled brightly in the cold, silent night sky, but the air around Jake felt heavy, as though the universe itself was holding its breath. The battle was over, the enemy defeated, but the hardest decision still lay before him. He stood alone at the edge of the camp, his mind racing, trying to sort through the chaos of emotions swirling inside him. He had never imagined he would be faced with a choice like this. But here he was, at a crossroads that could change everything. His feelings for Lyra and the other alien girls had grown deeper over time. Their bond was undeniable, born out of shared danger, mutual respect, and something more. Jake could feel it in the way his heart beat faster whenever Lyra was near, the way his thoughts were constantly occupied by her, by them. But there was something else, a sense of duty, of responsibility, that weighed heavily on him. The alien forces they had fought were not gone for good. The war was far from over, and the galaxy was still full of dangers. The truth was, they couldn't stay here forever. They couldn't hide away in this small corner of the jungle, pretending that everything would be all right. The time had come for him to make a decision, not just for himself, but for them all. Jake glanced over at the campfire, where Lyra, Kayla, Nara, and Bonner were gathered. They were talking quietly, their faces illuminated by the flickering flames, but Jake knew that this peaceful moment wouldn't last. Soon, they would have to leave, and the next chapter of their fight would begin. He knew the choice he faced wasn't just about survival, it was about what came next, about who they would become. He could sense the weight of their eyes on him, even from a distance. Lyra's gaze was steady and unwavering, as though she was waiting for him to make his move. But what did she want? What did they all want? Jake had spent so much of his life alone, fighting for survival, trusting only himself. But now, everything was different. He had found people who trusted him, who needed him, and who cared for him. But as much as he had grown close to them, there was something inside him that felt torn. Torn between his growing feelings for Lyra and the others, and the harsh reality of the war they were still fighting. His role in this war was crucial, but what would it mean for his future with them? Could he balance both, or would one have to be sacrificed for the other? As the night stretched on, the uncertainty of his situation became even more apparent. Jake knew that they couldn't remain hidden forever. Eventually, the Galactic Council would come for them again, and they would need to make a stand. But could he really go back to being a soldier, throwing himself into a never-ending battle, knowing that the people he cared about were with him every step of the way? Lyra's voice broke through his thoughts. "Jake," she called softly, her silhouette appearing in the dim light as she stepped toward him. "We need to talk." He didn't turn to face her immediately. Instead, he stood still, his heart racing as he waited for her to continue. He knew what she was going to say. She had always been direct, always had the strength to face whatever was in front of her. But this wasn't just about the war, it was about their futures, their lives. "I know you're thinking about the choices ahead," Lyra said quietly, standing beside him now, her presence comforting and intense all at once. "And I know it's not easy. The war is still far from over. We all have a duty to this fight, but that doesn't mean we can't have a future beyond it." Jake finally turned to her, meeting her eyes. There was a softness in her gaze now, a vulnerability that hadn't been there before. He could feel his heart hammering in his chest, the decision growing clearer, but it was still difficult to voice. "What if I can't choose between you and the war?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "What if I can't have both?" Lyra reached out, placing her hand on his arm. Her touch was gentle, but it carried an unspoken strength. "You don't have to choose between us and the war," she said. "But you do need to choose your place in it. We can fight together, Jake. We can have a future together, but only if you're willing to embrace both sides of who you are." Jake swallowed hard. His mind raced with possibilities, but his heart kept returning to one thought: he didn't want to lose them. Not now, not ever. But he also knew that his duty as a soldier was something he couldn't walk away from, no matter how much he wanted to. He looked back at the campfire, where the others were still talking. Kayla, Nara, and Bonner had grown silent, and it felt like the entire camp was holding its breath, waiting for his decision. "I don't know if I can be the man you want me to be," Jake admitted, his voice thick with emotion. "But I do know that I can't stand by and watch any of you go through this alone. Whatever comes next, I want to face it with all of you." Lyra's eyes softened, and she stepped closer, closing the gap between them. "We don't need perfection, Jake. We just need you, just as you are." Her words hit him like a wave, and in that moment, he knew what he had to do. He couldn't walk away from them. They had all sacrificed so much, fought so hard, and had become a family in a galaxy full of strangers. The war would always be a part of their lives, but so would this bond they had formed, this love that had blossomed in the middle of chaos. Jake took a deep breath, making his decision. "I'm with you," he said firmly. "I'll fight for us. For our future. I won't give up on what we have." Lyra's face broke into a soft smile, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Jake felt a sense of peace. Whatever came next, they would face it together, united as one. In that moment, he realized that this wasn't just about surviving the war. It was about living, truly living, with the people who had become his everything. And he wasn't going to let anything tear them apart. The war had raged on for what felt like an eternity. The galaxy had witnessed the rise and fall of countless empires, but none had faced a force like humanity. Jake stood on the edge of the battlefield, staring out into the vast expanse of space. The stars twinkled coldly in the distance, but to him, they no longer held the same beauty they once did. Now, they felt like distant reminders of everything they had fought for, and everything they had lost. The Galactic Council, a vast and powerful force of alien conquerors, had underestimated Earth from the very beginning. They had mocked humanity, thinking that a planet so young and unremarkable could never pose a real threat. But the Council had learned the hard way that humanity was not to be underestimated. Earth had fought back with a fury that the galaxy had never seen before. The battles were fierce, and lives had been lost, but now, it seemed like the tide had finally turned in their favor. The final battle was upon them. The alien fleets, once so confident, now lay scattered across the stars. Humanity had struck a decisive blow, and now the Galactic Council was on the brink of collapse. But Jake knew that this victory, while sweet, came with a heavy price. The loss of comrades, friends, and loved ones had left scars that would never fade. As Jake stood there, looking out at the battlefield, he could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him. His heart ached for those who were gone, for the soldiers who had given everything to see this day come. He thought of Bonner, the fearless warrior who had always had his back. Bonner's sacrifice had been the turning point in the war, and yet, the cost of that sacrifice was something Jake would never forget. He thought of Kayla, Nara, and all the others who had fought by his side, who had become family in the truest sense of the word. Lyra's voice broke through his thoughts. "Jake, we did it. We've won." Jake turned to see her standing beside him, her eyes filled with a mix of exhaustion and relief. The battle was over, but the weight of everything they had been through still hung heavy in the air. She stepped closer to him, her hand reaching out to gently rest on his arm. "You did it," she said, her voice soft but firm. "You led us to victory. You never gave up on us." Jake didn't respond right away. The words didn't seem enough. How could they be, when so many had lost their lives, and so much had been sacrificed? But as he looked at Lyra, he realized that the victory wasn't just about the battle. It was about everything they had endured together. The love, the losses, the moments of fear and hope, they had shaped them into something stronger than they had ever imagined. "We did it together," Jake said finally, his voice rough with emotion. "All of us." Lyra smiled, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. She had been with him through every step of this journey, and now, with the war over, they could finally begin to heal. There was still so much to rebuild, so much to do, but for the first time in a long while, Jake allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, there was hope for a future beyond the war. They stood there for a moment in silence, watching as the last remnants of the alien fleet were scattered across the stars. The Galactic Council had fallen, and Earth had emerged victorious. But Jake knew that this victory wasn't just about defeating an enemy. It was about the strength of the human spirit, about the power of unity in love in the face of insurmountable odds. The survivors of the battle gathered around them, their faces tired but filled with a sense of accomplishment. They had won, but the cost had been high. The camp was quiet, save for the sounds of soldiers speaking in hushed tones, reflecting on what had just transpired. As Jake looked around, he felt a surge of pride for the people who had stood by him. They had all fought not just for survival, but for something greater. They had fought for their future, for the chance to live, to love, and to be free. And now, that future was within their grasp. Bonner's words echoed in Jake's mind. "Don't forget why we're fighting. It's not just for today, it's for everything we hold dear. It's for the future we want to create." Those words had stayed with Jake through every battle, every loss, and every victory. They had been the guiding light that kept him going, even when the odds seemed impossible. And now, as the war came to an end, Jake understood what Bonner had meant. The future was uncertain, but it was theirs to shape. And as long as they stood together, there was nothing they couldn't overcome. Lyra's hand tightened around his arm, bringing him back to the present. She smiled at him, a soft, reassuring smile that spoke volumes. "We have our whole lives ahead of us," she said. "Let's make them count." Jake nodded, his heart swelling with emotion. They had made it through the darkest of times, and now, it was time to look toward the light. The war was over, but their journey was just beginning. They had won, not just the battle, but the chance to live in a world where peace, love, and hope could flourish once more. And in that moment, Jake knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, he would face them with Lyra, with his friends, and with the unwavering belief that humanity's greatest strength was its ability to endure, to love, and to rise above the impossible. Together, they had conquered the stars, and now, they could finally begin to live their lives in peace. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, Jake was no longer afraid of what it might hold. He was ready. And as he looked out into the vast, beautiful universe, he knew that anything was possible. The story of humanity had only just begun.